Hello, folks. It is story time again. Yes, it is that time of the week where I write a 1,000 word short story inspired by a piece of artwork on the spot, using it as a prompt to hopefully create some semblance of a tale and then talk about my thoughts here. So, if you have seen the thumbnail, you know that the artwork is quite different than what I've done in the past. It's very reminiscent of Mobius. If you do not know who Mobius is, take a look. You will see something that looks very familiar. He was a French artist, a very amazing artist, taken from us too soon, alas, but his artwork has inspired many other artists, and clearly this one. So I needed to find something that was a little more peaceful, a little bit more laid back for the soundtrack, and so I went back to a band called Helios, listen to their latest release called Domicile. So put it on the background while I read you a tale. But before we do that, let us check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled Flysch, and it's by a freelance artist named John Juarez from San Sebastian, Spain. First and foremost, I didn't really know what Flysch was. I looked it up after I wrote the story, so I referred to it as shale in the story. So on the subsequent rewrite, I will definitely fix that. But anyway, let's take a look. So we have these two young women standing on what I now know is called Flysch. And I really love the colors here. It's quite a varied array. And these two women, they look kind of like they're in a fantastical sort of world, I guess. It really reminds me of Mobius's work. If you're not familiar with Mobius, highly suggest you check him out. Really, really cool style, way ahead of his time in terms of illustration. But there's a couple of items we see here that are interesting. One is a book that they're both holding onto as they embrace, and their garb. I love the idea of this, like I said, taking place in a world that is not our own. It's familiar yet unfamiliar, and I can only imagine the implications that could come out of this from a storytelling perspective. But we do not see the world outside of this this narrow view of Flysch and these two women. So, John, thank you for this artwork. It's definitely a different style than I'm used to, but I really enjoy it and look forward to finding the story. So, with that said, let's see what I came up with. Suli ran. Skinned knees wouldn't stop her. A single lung wouldn't stop her, though it made her feel empty. An emptiness she could never fill, no matter how hard she tried. She focused on trying something else, one foot in front of the other. Though she was empty, she carried something that was not. It spurred her on with its yellowed leaves of time, contained within a folded piece of leather, stitched and bound, a book, colored like the sky. It didn't hold her back, it pushed her forward. Meg stumbled over a waterfall of shale, bubbling in whorls and waves. It wasn't cool and refreshing. It cut. It crumbled. She picked her way over it carefully because her legs were bare. The wind blew so hard she thought she might be carried away. The shale split it, but the wind also split the shale. She brought her purse up to block the projectiles as they raced for her head. They tapped, 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 as if knocking on a door, then fell and clack, clack, clacked. Suli stopped to adjust her bandages, which had fallen loose from the run. They were mottled with blood and sweat. She sighed and took the book in both hands. The top of it fit her hand so well. Her fingertips molded to the patterned cover. She traced it, inside and outside. Her hair tickled her cheek, short as it was. She tucked it behind her ears and under her hat. It didn't stay, short as it was. Meg lowered her shield, her purse, heavy on her shoulder, like a shield. She wondered if she would have to hold it up again, maybe walk the entire way like that. She chose stones as her path when she could, the shale when she couldn't. The wind had withered to a breeze, which allowed her to concentrate fully on her steps with shoes not made for such work. She was late. The scuffs on her shoes wouldn't do. She checked her hair, though it was short as it could be. Still, the cowlick was stubborn. Suli had reached the cliffs, that familiar waterfall of shale majestic in the sunset. She hadn't seen it in years. Her shadow pointed toward home, where there were no waterfalls. She didn't look back. She looked down, at the book again, which had become heavy. It took 2 hands to hold, so full. A page slipped free, rode the wind's current toward her destination. She ran again, twice as fast this time, 3 times. Ropes of grass lashed her bandages loose again, lashed at skin that had yet to heal. She let the bandages fall. Then the wind changed direction, coming at her now, pushing her back home. A wall she feared she couldn't fight. Meg fell forward, with windmilling arms, a new wind at her back, stronger than ever. The shale at her feet snapped, her shoes losing their grip. Her hands took the worst of it. She held herself in a quivering jackknife. Sully narrowed herself to the wind, like a knife. One hand on the book because the wind helped her carry it, and the other on her hat to keep the wind from stealing it. She took her first step onto the shale. Meg screamed. At the shale, at the wind, at her hands, at her feet. All of them had betrayed her. All of them had hurt her. Her scream was more powerful than the wind, its power bringing her upright. She almost cried, almost laughed. Both battled in her chest, neither winning. Sully stumbled, over shale that looked like a waterfall. Still, not bubbling, not flowing. Her hand pinned the page, but lost the book. It somersaulted over the stone ridges until it was lost in the color. Meg brought up her purse, her shield, by reflex, by precognition, by something else. More shale had broken off by some force, a great shard tumbling through the air at her, her arms trembling as she braced for what she couldn't dodge, was afraid to dodge, else she'd fall to the knives at her feet. Sully cried, with her body, with her voice. She folded the page she had and placed it in her shirt, the only secret she hadn't lost. Haunting but beautiful, the book flew up into the air and opened, showing the sky what it held within, an open heart that wasn't meant to be shared. Meg flinched, her shield held, her arms. Her eyes opened to the offender, lying at her feet, rectangular with edges that weren't sharpened shale at all. It parted with an altogether different color, almost like the sunset, almost like summer grass swelling in a warm gust. Sully smiled. A figure, lithe and perfect, stood ahead, concerned with something on the ground. So close to her destination, she resisted breaking into a sprint. The bandages at her legs, still loose, tickled and stung. She reaffixed them. She checked her hair, her hat, the page near her heart. Meg ran, the book in her hands, complete with all its mysteries. The shale didn't frighten her anymore, because she didn't need her legs to run. She flew, riding the waves of what she held in her hands, quiet but unstable, unbreakable but fragile. Sully stopped. Meg stopped. Sully moved toward her with a folded page in hand. Meg took it and knew exactly what to do. She knew where it belonged. Sully tucked her hair behind her ears and under her hat. It didn't stay. Meg laughed. Sully laughed. Meg held the book by the bottom of its cover. Her hand fit just right. Sully took the top of the book. It fit her hand just right. She thought it was still warm, but that would be impossible. Their free hands embraced one another. Chins rested on shoulders, eyes closed, bodies pressed together. One mouth smiled. One did not. The only words they needed were written upon yellowed leaves, bound in leather, dyed in a waterfall. Welcome to the end, dear viewer. I am so glad you made it. This is where I talk about my final thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like, and maybe what I learned. What did I discover on this journey that I inevitably find myself on week after week? The one thing I did discover on this journey is my subconscious at work. I was really stressing about this one. I was writing the story, going back between these two POVs, trying to discover what's going to happen. We have these two young girls racing toward each other, or it seems to be. One has a book, one does not. What are they meeting in the middle for? Well, in the artwork, it is an embrace. So I found my way to that embrace. Another idea I had that I did not execute was creating a story of that embrace, maybe with a touch bringing a flashback or some whisper in an ear, something like that. I think that would be an interesting exploration too, but I didn't go that way. But I'm going to try something a little bit different this week. I'm going to do a screen share to kind of specifically talk about some things that I did do, some failings, some things that I would definitely improve upon and maybe focus in on, I think, for subsequent drafts on this one. So you can see immediately I started off with a woman, the girl named Suli, and she was running. I always like very short and snappy opening lines. If you've read any of my books, you can see that they're typically pretty short. And I don't know where the single lung came from, but that's where it went. However, you can see it did lead into this emptiness, which was a counterpoint to this book she had, which is not empty. It's full of yellowed leaves of time contained within a folded piece of leather stitched and bound, a book. So I bring the book. We have Suli running forward, and then I immediately go back to Meg. And so I know it's kind of difficult to understand or visualize when I'm reading it, but in the writing you can see that I focused on a couple paragraphs from Suli, couple paragraphs for Meg, and back and forth like that over and over in this repetition of a POV shift. You can see sometimes I broke that rule. Here's a third paragraph. But what I did, and this is something that I like to call proportional pacing. I don't think I invented it. I've just noticed it here and there, and I actually wrote a short story. I'll probably do a separate video on it where it really emphasizes this fact, and that is going between two POVs, slowly narrowing down the duration of these paragraphs. So you can see here, it becomes back and forth. And again, I think this is probably part of the problem, is that I wasn't consistent. I would definitely fix the consistency there. We go from Meg to Suli to Meg to Suli to Meg to Suli. And then even toward the end, you can see here that I'm emphasizing pacing with actual shortening sentences and paragraphs. So we have single mirrored actions here, and then we go down again, Meg laughed, Suli laughed. And so this is where I'm establishing that final embrace and that last image you see. But you can see how the writing from a visual standpoint, it starts a little heavier, right? It's a little more beefier. The pacing is longer, or slower. From a standpoint of actual raw words, and then it slowly goes down to something very, very short, going back and forth between those POVs. And so I think that helps you with pacing, but it also can create a sense of these two people getting closer, because as they're farther apart, the paragraphs are longer. They have more actions. We're in their POV longer. And then as they start to approach each other, these lines, these paragraphs become shorter and shorter, which is not only emphasizing the pace as you read it, but emphasizing their proximity, which I think is kind of an interesting concept. And I think the meaning of this story is another thing I'd want to talk about. Strange, where it came from. So I envisioned that these two girls were friends, perhaps. It turned out to almost be, I think you could still go that route, but it almost felt like they were in a relationship of some kind, more than friends, because there's this book. It's really funny how this stuff comes out, and this is what I'm talking about, your subconscious, is that we have Suli talking about how she likes to hold the top of the book and it fits her hand just right. And then we talk about Meg and the bottom of the book fits just right. And I just got that from the image, because they're both holding the book at different aspects, but if you can think about it in kind of a metaphorical sense or symbolic sense, that represents their connection, kind of a yin and yang sort of thing. And so that was kind of an unexpected discovery, and I ended up liking it. When I was going through this story, I didn't realize that's where it was going. And it's almost, and the reason why I bring up the relationship, the forbidden relationship maybe, is that they have this book of secrets. I mentioned things like the book opens its heart to this guy, which is not to be seen, essentially. Suli ends up losing a page. It flutters around. Meg catches it. They complete the book again, and they embrace. They haven't seen each other for some time, it seems like, at least what I indicated out in the story. And so discovering that meaning, that alleged meaning, I was a lot more happy with what I came up with because like I said in the beginning, I just envisioned these two girls rushing toward each other for this inevitable embrace that you see in the image. But like, why? Like, what's going to happen? What is their story? And I thought about a lot of things about having it feel like a film, like where we get an action of a character and then we cut to a flashback, and then an action of another character, cut to a flashback. And all these memories are kind of going to accumulate to this inevitable embrace, and then it's all going to make sense. I didn't go that way. I stayed in the heads. I stayed in the present. I did not go back. I'm trying to stay away from flashbacks as much as I can because I know they are frowned upon, and we always want to see the story moving forward, not so much back unless it's for important reasons that cannot be explained otherwise. So I think what I learned is to, again, sometimes you just have to trust your subconscious. I'm not going to say it's going to get you out of a bind every time, and maybe I'm just describing meaning that is not there, that I did not anticipate, and I saw it after the fact, or maybe I'm trying to just bullshit my way through this story and make sure there's a meaning there. Either way, I think there's something to be learned here from the proportional pacing with the literal size of your paragraphs when you're trying to speed something up or slow it down. And like I said, I'm probably going to do a separate video on this because I have a shorter story I wrote for this Flash fiction contest that really demonstrates it a lot more cleanly than this one in fewer words. And also the kind of kinetic back and forth POV switch. I always try to name the character as soon as possible, if not the very first word when I switch a POV, because the last thing you want to do is confuse the reader. You want to make sure they understand whose head they're in, how they're experiencing the world. So don't forget that one. That one's pretty important. But if you'd like to chat more about storytelling in general, check out my Discord. There's a link in the description. It is completely free to join if you'd like. And we are starting a read-along. If you didn't see my announcement there, go check that out. It's going to be a fun little experiment, reading a book along with all of you guys. And of course, if you'd like to check out my longer form novels, you can check them out in the description below. So keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.